We should go on. And now we move to the third presentation, which is, I think, an online presentation. So we should have Tiziano, Gerosa, and Marco Gui presenting from home.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, Tiziano, buongiorno.
Good morning to everyone. Okay, so
Tiziano is going to present us something while you prepare the presentation about the age of mobile possession and its impact on students' performance. 1 second again. Okay, we can see the presentation.
okay, can you see it?
We can. Yes, perfect, Tiziano.
Okay.
Please go on.
So again, good morning to everyone. Today I'm going to present to you a study that I conducted with Marco Gui from the University of Milano-Bicocca, which aims to estimate whether the anticipation of the access to the first smartphone has an effect on middle school students' reading performance over time. And so why we decided to do that, just because we see that in the last decade, the age of access to the first smartphone has rapidly decreased in Italy. We collected data in 2018 on more than 3,000 students at grade 10, asking them at what age they received their first smartphone. And we found that on average, they receive it.
Sorry, Tiziano, please, can you stop your webcam, because it seems that you have a low band connection. And so
okay,
we are trying
I have to interrupt the
Sorry for this interruption.
Let me try. Okay. Is it better now?
Much better. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I was saying, just a second, because I cannot. Okay. I was saying that the average age of access to the smartphone in 2000 for students in 2011 was 11 years old, which is exactly the age of access to middle school, as you can see in the graph in the slide. You see the red line identify the age of access to middle schools. And most of the respondents declared to receive their first smartphone exactly at the beginning of this transition. And obviously, we know that especially in Italy, the transition from primary to secondary education is challenging for several reasons. Students enter new classes, have new and more difficult subjects. Teachers are changing, and they have new classmates. Moreover, they are facing deep social emotional changes related to the transition to adolescence. And last but not least, they move from a child-oriented to an academic-oriented learning approach, because secondary schools indeed require more self-motivation and personal responsibility than to elementary schools. I don't know, for example, students are expected to complete classes, assignments, and homeworks with less direct monitoring from adults, and to assume more responsibility for coordinating workloads in different subjects. Then to sum up, we can say that with the transition to primary to secondary school, students are required to adapt to increase the responsibility and workload in a critical developmental stage. And exactly in this moment, most of them receive a smartphone. We then decided to study whether, based on this increase of pre-adolescent responsibility, receiving the smartphone, their first personal smartphone at the beginning of middle school can affect their academic performance in the following year. At the basis of this interest is the fact that previous research found that Obviously, this transition implies a growing relevance of individuals and pre-adolescents' ability to defer small, immediate gratification of daily life to achieve future educational goals. Because obviously, think about a pre-adolescence. Every afternoon, they have to decide if spends hours and hours studying and doing homework instead of playing video games, watching TV. And they are relatively, they can decide relatively free from teachers and parents. And it's interesting because these two competing neural networks are activated when other pre-adolescents make these intertemporal choices between immediate and delayed rewards. And so the activation of the limbic network has been shown to predict this preference for small immediate gratification. And this mechanism is quite instinctive, while the activity of prefrontal and parietal areas related to higher order cognitive control is instead associated with choosing larger delayed rewards. But unfortunately, these cognitive control abilities are not fully developed in adolescence and need to be trained for a lot of time to be successfully learned and then exploited. And so we know that adolescents are and pre-adolescents are quite sensitive toward these immediate rewards, this instinctive mechanism of preferring immediate rewards, especially in the case of screen media. We know that they can use it for lots of time instead of studying or sleeping well. And then this can have negative consequences on their school performance. And previous research goes in this direction because previous studies found that a prolonged use of TV and video games is negatively associated to school performance. And other research underlined that smartphone can be even a stronger distractor compared to TV and video games because children and adolescents can use them whenever they want, wherever they want, and to do what they want. And most of the time they can use them without being monitored by adults because they are free to use it everywhere. So we can then expect two things. First, and more in general, thinking about what we said, we can expect the students who receive their first smartphone at the beginning, exactly at the beginning of middle schools, in a relevant transition stage, will perform worse in standardized reading tests over time compared to those who receive it later. This is just because the sooner you receive the smartphone, the less time you have to exercise the time discounting strategy. And then the more time you are at risk of wasting time with the smartphone instead of studying. This is more or less what the displacement hypothesis is saying. The second hypothesis is instead related to the expected heterogeneity of the effect of age of access to the smartphone. And we expect that the negative effect of smartphone on early owners' performance over time will be higher for students who already make an extensive use of screen media, TV and video games, even before entering in middle school. That is because we expect that parents that leave their children free to spend a lot of time on screen media since primary schools, in a sense, give them less opportunity and resources to learn how to postpone screen time gratification. And then they facilitate wrong use of the smartphones, especially if their children receive it at the beginning of middle school. So how we tested this hypothesis? We used data from the Digital Wellbeing School Project, which is a sample of more than 3,000 students at grade 10 And this data has retrospective information of student age of access to their smartphone. This is a self-declared declaration of participants. We linked then this data with INVALSI longitudinal data on students' scores in reading test, in Italian language test, both at grade 5 and grade 8 in 2012 and 2015. Moreover, we linked this data with the information extracted from the student questionnaires at grade 5, obviously conducted on the same students, with socio-demographic characteristics, home possessions, language spoken, free time activities, test anxieties, so with a lot of covariates which might be related to variation in students' test performances over time. This is a graphical representation of our data. In the end, we have this the reading test scores of students at 2 points in time. So at the end of primary school, at the end of grade 5, when they have 10 years old, more or less, and at the end of middle school, so at the end of grade 8. And we have also the age of access to the smartphone for the students. And we decided to identify 2 groups, the early owner groups, so those who received the smartphone exactly at the beginning or at the end of primary school. So just a few months after performing the test score. And the other group is the late owners group, which is made of students who received the smartphone later on at 12 years old, or from 12 years old to 16 years old. And we then perform a first stage of analysis, matching these 2 groups with the propensity score matching technique and different matching approaches in order to identify 2 homogeneous subgroups of respondents and trying to control for the parallel trend assumption. And in stage 2, we then estimated the changes in reading test scores of early owners over time net to those registered for late owners using a difference in difference approach. So these are the results of the first stage of analysis. As you can see, we have a good common support, and we identified 2 relatively homogeneous groups of early and late owners. You see that the distribution of all our covariates are quite well distributed, are quite similar in the 2 groups. There are no significant difference in their distribution. So we can skip to the main results of the study, so the effect estimates. And these are the results for our deep regression model with standard error clustered at the individual level on the overall sample. As you can see, we found no effects of receiving the smartphone exactly at the beginning of middle school compared to those who received later. Then we move to the heterogeneity of the effects. Here we are estimating the same model, but dividing the 2 groups between those who who declare to use TV and video games at grade 5 less than 2 hours per day and more than 2 hours per day on the other side. As you can see, again, we have no effects in the subgroup of students who declare to use TV and video games less than 2 hours per day at grade 5. Otherwise, we found significant and negative effects of early owners in the group of students who declare to use TV and video games for more than 2 hours per day. The result is robust, looking also at the estimates of raw data and the results for using the match the samples with different techniques. As you can see, the effects is more than 2 standard deviation, a negative effect of more than 0.2 standard deviation. So what we can conclude then, we have to reject the null hypothesis, the first hypothesis, because we have a null effect of anticipating the age of access to the smartphone on the overall sample. But we can retain the second hypothesis because we find a negative and significant effect of 0.2 standard deviation of anticipating the age of access to the smartphone for those who had difficulties in deferring the small limited gratification since primary schools. So for those who are left free by their parents to use TV, for those, who were left free to use freely TV and video games when they were in primary school. What are then our suggestion to school? These results suggest us to say that maybe schools could ask parents of all students to postpone the age of access to the smartphone, even avoiding its use for educational purposes. That is, if this kind of policy will produce no effect, nor positive or negative effect on the reading skills for all the good gratification layers, based on our finding, we can expect a positive, a significant effect on reading skill, at least for the bad gratification layers. So it seems a win-to-win in the end opportunity. Moreover, we can suggest schools to invest in informing parents since primary schools on the best practices they can put into practice to support and monitoring screen media activities, the screen media activities carried out by the children. This is just because in this way schools can offer to parents tips in order to give students more resources and opportunities to develop their temporal discounting abilities. So the last slide about limitation of other research, we obviously have two methodological shortcomings. First, we are working with data with only 2 time points, and to better control for parallel trend assumption could be useful to work with with at least 2 measures of the outcomes before the transition, so before the treatment in some way. And another limit is that we are working on self-reported data. So we are working on the self-reported data from students. In the future, it could be useful to try to collect this data directly, asking parents to answer the questionnaire, because we expect that parents are more reliable in giving an answer about the age of access to the first smartphone of the children. An additional insight finally could be trying to evaluate the effect of anticipating the age of access to the smartphone even before the transition to middle school, because we've seen that this is a rapidly growing phenomenon, and students are receiving in the last few years, primary school students are receiving the smartphone at age 7 and even before. So this could be a good way to estimate whether, in a moment in which children have no idea on how to postponing rewards, it could be interesting to see whether giving them a smartphone can have a negative effects on their school performances. So thank you. And these are the references, and if you have a question, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiziano. Thank you very much. Questions, sorry, in the room. Giovanni, please. Questions from home, meanwhile? Okay, there are problems in the room with the microphone, but almost there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tiziano, for your presentation. And I think you're dealing with a very, very important topic, probably one of the most important topic in the future, if you also look at other contexts. And I wanted to ask you, to your knowledge, what are our authorities doing? Because in other countries, it is a very debated topic. Like in France, there was this very well-known crusade of the ministries against smartphone in classroom. So they were forbidden, and that raised a lot of discussion. In the US, there is this problem of this highly marketed educational system. So there are lots of incentive for firms to provide educational programs, and that interferes with prevention or with what you're studying. And in Italy, I honestly do not, apart from some generic statements, I have no idea what the authorities are doing, and maybe you can give us some insights on this. Thank you.
Yeah, to be honest, something is moving now, but is more driven by group of parents, communities of parents which are interested in delaying the age of access to the smartphone. But this is primarily due to the fact that the advent of the DAD changed everything. Teachers were in some way, they had to ask parents to buy a smartphone for the children in order to contact them and give them the assignment, because in some families, children cannot have access to a computer. And then, so before the pandemic, the Ministry of Education invested in a sort of decalogue, a list of suggestions on how to manage children and adolescents access to the smartphone. But with the pandemic, everything stopped, and now, to be honest, I don't see the investments from higher level, higher institutional level in this topic. But I see that some schools are working to produce some rules and guides on how to manage smartphone for parents and students, and especially parents are working a lot in some specific contexts, are working in order to create sort of deals with schools in order to postpone age of access to the smartphone, or in other cases to use it only for specific purposes, the didactic purposes. I think that this is the situation now in Italy. Obviously, I think we need to invest in this field of research in order to offer evidence to the institutions that can help them in developing policies that manage this issue, not only in school but also at home, because I'm quite sure that giving a smartphone to children, 5-year-old children, can be problematic in some way. So yeah, that is.
Okay, thank you. There is a question coming from Mima Siniscalco. Please, Mima.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. I'm very interested in this topic, which I studied myself for a long time, so mainly about television. And I find it interesting that you put into connection the use of television with the use of smartphone. So the screen time and screen habits, I think it's very, very useful. And I also agree with your indication that parents need to be sensitized to the topic. Now, my question is, you created the two groups with specifying sort of the lower border of the people who got early the smartphone as 10 or 11, if I'm not wrong. And then those that received it later as 12, starting from 12. And I wonder whether it wouldn't make sense to increase a bit the gap between the two groups. So having those that, so having sort of an age which is not considered, and then starting from 14, or really where there is a choice, or maybe there are too few cases, I don't know.
Sorry, Tiziano, I want to add something because it is highly related to one of my questions, which is exactly why aren't you using the fact that you have some more variability there, at least I think, to generate 3 groups, and that may be useful also to have hints about what happened to the one who received the smartphone even before. You can somehow with 3 points try to understand what would happen before as an interpolation of the different points you have, the 2 estimates you have. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely a good point. We reasoned and talked a lot about that, but in the end we decided to work only on these 2 groups because there is a methodological reason related to the data. We have few cases of students who received the smartphone at 14 years old or maybe later on, and those who declared to receive the smartphone at 17 or 18 years old were a bit strange cases. We thought that maybe they were answering by chance because they have strange pattern of answers to the questionnaires, and we decided to focus only on students in that specific range of age. And the idea to focus exactly on those who received the smartphone at 10 or 11 years old, but we chosen only those with 10 years old that become 10. Sorry, they become 10 years old only after finishing the INVALSI test score. So we are quite sure that they received the smartphone after that threshold, and we decided to focus only on them because we thought that if we thought about the school transition as the middle school transition as a specific moment in which they have to learn how to postpone gratification, they have few months to work on these skills and have practical experience of middle school life. And then we thought that this specific moment is the most relevant for the development of this higher order postponing gratification skills. And then this is why we decided to identify that specific group, because we thought that that group is most sensitive to this passage. We tried to work on more groups or more control groups, comparing 11, 12, and 13, 14 years old. But as I told you before, the last group was about 15 cases and get strange results, which were in line with apparently in line with those of the 12, those with 12 years old students. So in the end, we decided to simplify the analysis because it gave us the more interpretable results. And I think it was not an opportunistic choice, because in the end we found no general effect, the general negative effect of the smartphone. So I don't know if I answered your question to be honest, but if you need more explanation, you can ask me.
Thank you very much, Tiziano. Okay, sorry, there's a last question, very brief question, very brief answer. Please, Tiziano, because we are.
Thank
Sorry,
you very
yeah.
much, Cristina from Italy, from INVALSI. And yes, your presentation to me is very meaningful, and the topic is very hot. Also internationally, we have seen the impact of COVID and of technology on learning, which is massive. So the topic is very hot, and I'm not sure, however, about the results, not the results, but the consequences. We also need to equip children with technological skills. So how would you regard your results in this perspective? I mean, we are talking about including technology from the early years, from preschool onwards. And so, yeah, there is a trade-off probably to what to do. In addition, we have our own qualitative study concerning learning to learn that says that teachers are worrying about technology in school, in all school levels. However, probably we need to help children use technology rather than saying, well, you're not going to be exposed up to a certain age to technology. Because I think that even though teachers in our study say, actually, the use of technology implies a worse reading comprehension of children, because they scroll down up and down the screen and they read very superficially. However, children need to be somehow helped to be trained in the use of technology. What do you think about this?
Very brief, please, Tiziano.
Yeah, I think you already gave the answer. I think it's very important to invest in media education training activities before thinking about give them access to some technologies. And school can have a primary role in training teachers, students, and even parents in how to use properly new media and smartphone in particular, but not only in terms of technical skills, but more, I was thinking more in about the digital skills, those defined by the DigComp framework. So skills related to how to communicate well, how to manage your identity online, and how to manage time when you are using these devices. So this, I think, this is very important, and institutions should invest in this kind of trainings before thinking about increasing ICT's investments in schools, or saying that children must have their smartphone at 2 years old, things like that. So,
Thank you very much again, Tiziano.